All right, it is Tuesday, and yes, I'm wearing the same sweater again. This is pre-recorded. See the baby glowy box and glowy ball are the same color. This is pre-recorded. This is in no way a response to anything someone said yesterday. I'm doing this because people freak out otherwise. It's time travel. No, I'm kidding. Some things I just find funny. And this story I may find funnier. It's a combination of stories, but I may find funnier than is healthy. I find it funny, I think, again, as a defense mechanism, because I've seen this happen over and over and over and over again. And, I don't want to forget this time. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. Also, if you are in the Ontario area, southern and eastern Ontario, I am joining the Ed the Sock War on Stupid tour. Go to edthesock.com to get your tickets in a bunch of dates. I'm not going to spend more time on that. I'll plug it again on Feedback Friday. Because I want to deal today with, again, something that's probably pretty serious, but I can't help but be a little bit amused. And that is how bad online media, like media that you read online, is at covering internet culture phenomenon. And there was a whack of articles of late, and this is when, back in the day, somebody would have gone, collusion! And back in the day, I was like, no, it's just such an echo chamber that various outlets think so similarly and respond to things so similarly that, yeah, it appears totally coordinated, but it's not. And I think in this case, it wasn't even a response to the same event. But let me show you what I'm talking about. The first one was an article published on, when was it published? January 25th, that says 4chan trolls 4chan trolls flood laid off HuffPost. Oh wow, that's a bad sentence. Anyway, BuzzFeed reporters with death threats. 4chan trolls flood laid off HuffPost BuzzFeed reporters with death threats. There, I said that better. The threats are part of a coordinated campaign organized on the far right message board. People are already giggling. I know. This is hacker known as 4chan territory. Basically, what happened, see, the reality is far less sexy. 4chan trolls troll laid off HuffPost and BuzzFeed reporters because they think it's hilarious, because BuzzFeed and HuffPost reporters don't get paid very much and therefore tend to be rather reactive. Which you could say, well, that's really mean. That's the reality of troll lulls. It's not a nice thing. It's also not... People get mad at me when I say this, but I think it's less that services like 4chan are alt-right, and they may have sort of slipped alt-right just by process of elimination. I think, though, it's more that they just... The alt-right, how do I put this? The alt-right uses shitposting, which is an art that 4chan sort of exists because of. I won't say that 4chan perfected shitposting, because that sounds too much like the hacker known as 4chan territory. But if it were not for shitposting, 4chan probably wouldn't have become as popular as it did. For people who don't know what shitposting is, it's like inputs. You post shit. You post stuff that's nonsense and nothing and is meaningless. And it's usually offensive because people find that funny. But this is a shining example of how people mess up correlation and causation on the internet. I'm not going to get more into the 4chan alt-right thing. now because it's besides the point. The point is reporting in a screaming headline, naming 4chan by name, and saying that HuffPost and BuzzFeed reporters got death threats. If you understand the internet, you recognize that this is playing their game. You are giving them maximum lulls. You are making media a greater target by not understanding how internet cred works. And, you know, the culture war being what it is, it must have really sucked for those people who got laid off. Unfortunately, why is my Xbox on? Oh, that's weird. I'm going to have to check that out. It won't turn off. Weird. But you know, there is collective blame on services like that. I learned that the hard way when I did one op-ed piece for Polygon that was a response to an article in Polygon that I didn't like. And I didn't get mad. I got even. I went, hey, there's another side to this. All right, but one article. And I got labeled a Polygon shill. So, you know, people are very reactive at these sites that are very connected to the left or the right. And even if an individual reporter isn't. And it's unfortunate. It sucks. It's the reality of the greater culture war. But that doesn't mean that you do something patently irresponsible and make it worse for these people by elevating it, by making it a headline. Like, if you think they're just trolls, why are you reporting it? If you think they're not trolls, why are you calling them trolls? Trolls, by their very nature, do things just for lulls. It is not serious. So there's an internal logic fault here. Either you think these people are trolls, which means don't feed the trolls, or they're not trolls, and you shouldn't be calling them trolls. You should probably be getting law enforcement involved, not giving 4chan trolls a headline they can giggle over. But then, not to be outdone, and to remind everybody that Canadian media is no less dumb when it comes to these sorts of things, the CBC, The Fifth Estate, which is a TV show on CBC, put this thing online. I'll just let you see it, okay? Why incels are a real and present threat for Canadians. At least they used a smaller font. They weren't totally behind it. No, I'm kidding. Increase in violence has criminologists sounding the alarm. Now, the thing I found interesting about this article, interesting in that, you know, interesting, frustrating, not interesting, oh, isn't that neat kind of way, is how they have to manipulate the story, the facts, and the data. Facts and data are a little different for me. I'll show you why. To get any sort of story here. And that's what I find interesting and kind of tragic here, because I just feel the stretch. And there's a major, like, on its face manipulation of data here that I want to point out, because at least the NBC article got the facts right. They just shouldn't have given it attention. But they start off, of course, with some, you know, guy in Colorado, the guy in Toronto. So we have two people, one of whom was stopped before he could kill anybody, one who wasn't. That, you know, the van attack in Toronto took place about 15 minutes from my old house, so I do not speak about this lightly. I want to be clear that there were about 2 hours. I didn't know where my own husband was because he wasn't answering his phone, and he could have been in that area. I was checking in on all my friends who work in that area. It was a scary day. I had friends phoning me from the US to make sure I was okay. It was scary. So I don't want anybody to accuse me of making light of this thing. I'm not. I'm just keeping a level head. But they bring that up. The thing about the Alex Manessian case is it hasn't gone to trial yet. So we don't actually know a lot of facts for certain what his motive was, what defense they are going to argue, if any, if he's not just going to plead guilty. We don't know that yet. So just including him in this stuff because of one Facebook post, which could have been made during, a profound mental breakdown, it's a big leap. Okay, we don't know for sure. We're not going to know until his trial. But moving on, again, incels interact in forums like 4chan, Reddit, and a few public incel boards, and even on popular social media platforms, including Facebook and YouTube. And there we go, doom. They often express extreme feelings of misogyny and hatred. You guys know what incels are, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but experts interviewed by the Fifth Estate have identified 120 instances of extreme violence in Canada by right-wing groups, including incels, in the past 30 years. This is compared to only 7 by Islamist-inspired extremists. Did you guys catch the fact fudge? Actually, I won't call this fudge. This is like straight up dark chocolate. Did you catch the fudging of facts? Did you see the obvious and not at all subtle manipulation of data? Okay, I'll read it again. Experts interviewed by the Fifth Estate have identified 120 instances of extreme violence in Canada by right-wing groups, including incels, in the past 30 years. I'll focus more. Extreme violence in Canada by right-wing groups, including incels. If someone were just going to gloss over this paragraph, they would think there would have been 120 instances over the past 30 years of violence committed by incels. That's not what it actually says. Right-wing groups, including incels, over the past 30 years. Now, it's undeniable that right wing, ironically, they call themselves Christians. I'm hesitant to call them that because why do you promote the religion of a guy who's a pacifist, that most people accept as a pacifist, by committing violence? These things don't make sense, but it's true that over the past 30 years, that time frame is extremely important. Right-wing Christian groups have been more responsible for acts of extreme violence than Islamist-inspired extremists. Yes, that's accurate. But 120 instances of extreme violence were not committed by incels. As far as we know, there's only been one in Canada. That's the only one they reference here. Just the one that happened in Toronto. And this is another part that cracked me up because I actually know the reason why this happens, and the fact that the CBC didn't get this right. Authorities in Canada and the US are often quick to call these incidents lone wolf attacks. But criminologists and sociologists are sounding the alarm on incels and other growing internet subcultures that promote extreme violence. Okay, here's the reason that Canadian authorities, I don't know about the US, but Canadian authorities call these things lone wolf attacks, because there's no organized, politicized, if you're going to call it terrorism, it has to be a foreign group that somebody's been radicalized by. But these are still people who just, they're disturbed and they are violent. They are not violent because they're disturbed. Most people who are mentally ill are not violent. Profoundly mentally are not violent. Profoundly mentally ill people are more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators of it. My Bell Let's Talk video is happening tomorrow, so I won't talk too much about that. But they are lone wolf attacks. This isn't an organized criminal conspiracy. These are miserable people on a message board. It doesn't fit the burden based on the way our laws are written as any sort of conspiracy or any sort of terrorism which is driven by foreign actors. Domestic terrorism is sort of a colloquialism. Yeah, that's why they call them lone wolf attacks. So again, and this is what I mean, manipulation of data versus manipulation of facts. That first one was straight up manipulation of data. This one isn't a manipulation of data, it's a manipulation of the facts. It is a fact that law enforcement calls these things lone wolf attacks because by their definitions, by the definition of, the laws of Canada, they are defined as lone wolf attacks. That has nothing to do with sociologists determining that there is a growing social problem. I don't understand why these left-leaning types wanted to separate social justice from criminal justice and then get upset when criminal justice and social justice don't overlap. This is exactly why I have a problem with being criminal justice and social justice. A just criminal justice system is also socially just. I get why they separated it. Academics love their syntax stuff. They love their terminologies. But justice is just justice, man. You can't shave that freaking grape, right? You ever tried to shave a grape? Try it. You'll understand the metaphor better. So what's happened with this article? This is another quote that I feel has kind of been twisted. These people are extraordinarily dangerous, Mike Arntfield, a criminologist at Western University in London, Ontario, told the Fifth Estate. As soon as you have a suicidal, disoriented male, all bets are off in terms of what they're capable of doing. Many are suicidal and some are homicidal. And then this group, in parentheses, has an organization to it. I'd like to know what that word actually was. But you notice it's suicidal first? Well, if someone is homicidal, yeah, you stop them from hurting people and you put them in jail. If someone is suicidal, you get them help so they don't hurt each other. And the fact that he put many of them, let me read it again. As soon as you have a suicidal, disoriented male, all bets are off in terms of what they're capable of doing. Suicidal starts with suicidal ideation. Now, one of the things I have learned from talking to people who self-identify as incel or former incel, talking to former incels, people who once saw themselves as involuntarily celibate and now are no longer celibate or don't consider themselves involuntarily so. There are some people who do cross over into the men going their own way category where they're like, no, I'm doing this by choice. But it's really interesting to talk to the people. And despite all the angry rhetoric, for some people, all it took was a female family member giving them a hug. These are people who are emotionally and sometimes socially isolated. These are people who have been taught that the only acceptable emotion that a man can show is anger. And so they are expressing their pain, they are expressing their loneliness through online forums in the way they've been taught is the only way that is acceptable. Now, granted, the people I've talked to didn't go on to hurt anybody ever, and I think that's very important to acknowledge, but it's still the point still stands that the if you really think the whole involuntarily celibate identity is a serious problem, the way to solve that problem, and I'm very hesitant in that terminology because people have to have their own autonomy about what help they get. But the way to solve that problem is to show these, the term incel was coined by a woman, but they're overwhelmingly male. To show these folks kindness and empathy and bring them back from that dark place. It's not dehumanizing them and making them dangerous. You're just feeding in to this high status, low status thinking that you read all the time in incel communities. I mean, I remember a time when, incels were the people that there was sort of an internet agreement that you didn't make fun of them because it was too mean and there was too much fear that these guys were actually going to take their own lives, that everybody's just like, leave them alone, don't mention them, just let them be. They stick to their corner, they rage, it's okay, these guys are overwhelmingly harmless. And then the whole Elliot Rodger thing happened. And then, unfortunately, when these, I don't even remember the terminology to them, people who kill more than 3 people at once. Once these criminals, these murderers, become famous, the copycats skyrocket. I mean, it happened with the Columbine school shooting. Like, why has there been this huge uptick in school shootings after Columbine? Because the Columbine shooters became famous. I really think there's the same thing going on here, that Elliot Rodgers got so much media attention that now it's this identity with some glamour attached to it. And it's kind of tough because news reporters got to report news, and when people get hurt, it is news. But this needs to be done with the understanding that once you make someone famous in connection to a sort of ideology or identity or act, you are going to get a copycat phenomenon. And that's not the only reason for things happening, but it is a driving factor. So it's not surprising that we've seen, a handful of people citing that. Now, again, I think this is jumping the gun because we haven't had a trial in the Toronto case. We don't know for certain that was truly his motivation just because he posted something day of. And if you see the post, it's unhinged, okay? Like, that's why I wouldn't be surprised if there's something else going on and that was just what bubbled out of his very broken brain and soul on that day, but that there was more going on. I could be completely wrong, but the difference between me and the CBC is that I'm saying I don't know. And they're making it sound like they're certain that this is the reason for this. And there have been other high-profile crimes in Canada where the media has been extremely wrong about this kind of stuff. And I had to shut my mouth because I had information I wasn't supposed to have. And so I was like, but then when, the trial came out, I watched the media try to pull it back to their preconceived ideas, but they couldn't entirely. And so that's why it's very important not to prejudge these things if the information isn't publicly available. The complete information isn't publicly available, and you have to wait to actually get any firm conclusions for their trial, if there is one. If they plead guilty, sometimes we never know unless somebody can get their records based on access to information or whatever. But this is why I say there's a difference in manipulating data, like that study, which is just shame on them. I hope they get an ombudsman complaint with that, because that was just a misleading use of statistics. That was unethical. But then there's the fact that, yes, He did post something on Facebook that day. No, we are not sure that was actually the root cause of what happened. We have to wait and see. And that is the only conclusion you can come to without manipulating facts. Now, that doesn't really serve you when you're producing a television show and you have to produce a certain number of, fear-mongering, sizzle stories per year that, old frightened white Canadians want to watch. That's who watches the CBC, other than like shows like Kim's Convenience. Old white people who don't necessarily live in urban centers. But that's why Coronation Street is one of their big shows for, if you want to get a sense of where the CBC's at, yes, Coronation Street was so popular they couldn't even preempt it for the Olympics. And I don't think it benefits anyone to frighten old people with the internet, but it certainly makes them watch, I guess. And the frustrating thing is when I hear from family members that, there's these things on the internets, and, their points of reference are news sources like this and The Big Bang Theory, the show. And they are not interested in hearing from me, who, has a better than average awareness of life on the intertubes. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. Their TV told them it's so. That is more real than real to people of a certain age. Their TV told them something. That's not, I know a lot of young people, their phone told them something, or their internet's told them something, therefore it's real. But for older people, their TV told them it's real. Their own flesh and blood kid who has a better than average understanding of this stuff, not as real as the TV. And that's the problem with this. It's contributing to the cultural divide, so that people who frequent 4chan, which are a lot of people who, teenagers and young adults still at least lurk on 4chan, Reddit, they kind of moved over to Reddit, kind of, but that's why, hey, 4chan and Reddit, those are the big places. The minute it's on 4chan and Reddit, why are you bothering? But it is making it harder to talk with each other, to actually effectively communicate over the generation gap, because these news services who clearly don't, they may get information on the internet. They may be able to collect facts, but they don't understand it in the context of these internet communities. And that's why I'm so glad I took anthropology in university, as weird as that experience was, because I had a prof who was telling the class that incest has no biological problems with it. It's just a social taboo. University education to get taught that. It didn't take. But, the learning about cultural relativism and learning about how to examine a culture from the inside on its own terms, and checking your own biases at the door so that you can actually understand the function of certain cultural points is extremely important. And a lot of people who come at this stuff do it through sociology degrees because it's easier to get thesis approval for internet stuff through sociology departments, but it's a very different approach. And I'm really glad I went the approach I did, because it seems to create more accurate results than the ones I'm seeing getting grant money for. But anyway, thought you'd find that interesting. Hopefully I've shown you a little bit about how to carefully read articles and what they're actually saying, because you can be misleading and be factually accurate. And I can't stand that stuff. I find it so intellectually dishonest. Anyway, thanks for watching. Tomorrow's Bell Let's Talk Day. I'm going to do a mental health video. It probably won't be what you think. but that's a good thing. Okay, thanks for watching.